Yesterday, we began our discussion of how the cognition of voidness liberates us from uncontrollably recurring rebirth or samsara. And in order to explain that, in order to understand that, we need to understand what actually are the true sufferings that we want to become liberated from. Why is it that we need to become free from uncontrollably recurring rebirth? And what are the causes for it? And how do we actually stop it? And then how does the understanding of voidness bring about that stopping? So there are many, many levels of what we need to understand in order to understand how we get rid of samsara. Yesterday, we discussed the true type of sufferings that we experience. There's the suffering of unhappiness, and there's the suffering of our ordinary happiness, which is called the suffering of change, because it changes, it doesn't last, and it never satisfies. We always want more, and if we have too much of it, we either get bored or it turns into unhappiness, as in eating too much of your favorite food, or your loved one holding and caressing your hand. If they do it for several hours, then you're going to wear away the skin, and it's going to become extremely painful. So. Or lying in each other's arms, and then your arm falls asleep, and it becomes very unpleasant. So that's the suffering of change. And then we have the all-pervasive suffering, which is the basis for that. And the basis is that we have the type of body and the type of mind, as in this example of, the type of arm that's going to fall asleep if somebody is lying on it for the whole night, and then it's going to become very uncomfortable. So we have that type of body, we have that type of mind that is going to be the basis for experiencing this up and down of sometimes happy, sometimes unhappy, and no security, no stability whatsoever. So that's uncontrollably recurring rebirth, that we are born over and over again with this type of body and mind. And what we want to do is to gain liberation from that, which means that we are, what it doesn't mean is that we're going off to some transcendent realm and will exist without a body and mind, and so no worries. But as is asserted by many of the non-Buddhist Indian schools of thought, but and practice, but rather that we continue to, go on experiencing life, etc., continue working to help others, for example, but with a different type of body and mind, one which is not subject to these first two types of suffering, unhappiness, happiness, and that would be as a liberated being, an arhat, or to further get rid of deeper limitations or obscurations, they're called, so that we continue with completely unlimited body and mind, with not limited positive factors like love, etc., so that we can have equal love, equal concern for absolutely everybody, and be aware of everybody and everybody's concerns and so on, as an omniscient Buddha. Okay. Now, we need to look at the causes for the three types of suffering that we explained. We saw that the deepest, not the deepest, but what is the foundation for these sufferings are the two types of unawareness. That unawareness means that either we don't know or we know in an inverted and opposite way to the way that things actually are. So the first level of unawareness is unawareness of behavioral cause and effect. What, if we're experiencing unhappiness, what is its cause? And that's destructive behavior. If we're experiencing ordinary happiness, what is the cause for that? And the cause for that is our constructive behavior. When we speak about cause, you have to understand the Buddhist analysis of causality, which is, of course, not very simple, but when you say the cause of unhappiness is destructive behavior, the compulsiveness behind our constructive behavior, and then, of course, there's a deeper level in terms of our unawareness of how we exist, etc. You shouldn't think that it is a simplistic view that one cause leads to one result. If you think in terms of that, then you get into this whole incorrect conceptual framework that I'm suffering and I'm unhappy because I'm bad, and it's because of what I did, and I'm guilty, and so on, and it's all my fault. It's not like that. Because whatever we experience comes from a tremendous amount of causes, a tremendous amount of conditions and circumstances for that cause, the causal nexus to be able to give a result. And there are many, many different results that come from it. So it's not just this one-to-one correlation. So when we say that unhappiness comes from destructive behavior, you have to understand that this is an oversimplification of the whole process so that we can focus on overcoming and stopping acting destructively. Is that clear? Okay. Now, what is underlying both that unhappiness and our ordinary happiness is our unawareness of how we exist. And because of being unaware of how we exist, then we act in a destructive way. And here we're talking about compulsion. Compulsiveness is what karma is all about. So compulsively we act in a destructive way based on disturbing emotions that we're thinking in terms of a solid, independent me, and then if we don't get our way, we're angry and we want to get things to us. So we're very greedy and attached to things we don't want to let go and so on. So based on that, then we might yell at somebody if they annoy us or hit them or do all sorts of nasty things. But that misconception about how we exist is also underlying our so-called neurotic type of constructive behavior of being a perfectionist. We always have to be the good one, and we're always with a misconception that we're going to be helpful. We give our advice and our opinion about absolutely everything, even when it is unasked for and inappropriate. So we have compulsive destructive and compulsive constructive behavior based on this unawareness of how I exist. And I'm always right. Everybody really is concerned about what I think and my opinion, etc. I need to be the center of attention. I mean, there's all sorts of things that come from that. Self-cherishing is sometimes the package in which all of that is included. And we also saw that this unawareness of how we exist is what is driving our uncontrollably recurring rebirth. And that is really what we need to aim to overcome and to stop. Stop, it's the compulsiveness, which is part of it, that compulsively go on and on and on under the influence of this unawareness of how we exist and how everybody exists. Okay, that's sort of a summary of what we discussed yesterday. Today we have to go a little bit more deeply into our analysis to understand how this uncontrollably recurring rebirth, which is what samsara means, how that actually works. How does it occur? Because if we understand the mechanism of it, then we will have a better idea of how to stop it. And the description and analysis of the process of samsaric rebirth is described by the 12 links of dependent arising, which is a very extensive and very deep topic, and one that is very important to understand, recognize. It has many, many different ramifications in terms of not just stopping our uncontrollably recurring rebirth, but also in dealing with our daily lives. So let's look at these 12 links. First link is unawareness. Unawareness here, remember I was using this as a translation for the word ignorance in order to avoid this connotation that we're stupid. But simply we don't know, or we know in an incorrect way. And this is specifically about how we and all beings exist. So it's referring specifically to unawareness about the so-called persons. That would include, you always have to think in terms of individual mental continuums, continuities of experience, individual subjective experience, moment to moment to moment. This is what we are speaking about when we speak of, usually called a mind stream. So a mental continuum, a continuum of mental activity. And that mental activity is always individual. You know, when I experience eating, you don't experience eating. You know, I mean, it's individual, and it is subjective in the sense that it's accompanied by all sorts of emotions and memories and so on of each individual person that is experiencing. And in each lifetime, this continuum, which has no beginning and no end, and demonstration of that is in terms of causality, and we don't want to go too deeply into that, but you can't have something that starts from nothing and then changes from moment to moment, and there's no basis for saying that's something that continues moment to moment without degenerating. We're not talking about something that, you know, falls apart, you know, and degenerates. So like water dripping out of a vase with a hole in the bottom, well, that's eventually going to, there'll be no more water. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a mental continuum that is from moment to moment subjectively experiencing, and that doesn't decline. That goes on moment to moment. So something like that, that doesn't decline, can't start from nothing and can't just not produce another moment. So we get into the discussion of no beginning and no end to individual continuums of subjective experiencing of things. Now, in each lifetime, there is going to be, because of the various tendencies and habits and so on, this moment-to-moment experience of things is going to be based on, labeled on, imputed on. The whole mechanism is rather complex, but it's going to be associated with a different physical basis, which will be limited, and a different grosser level of experiencing of things. I don't know how to say that in simpler terms, but as the example that we used yesterday of a fly, well, because of various instincts and so on, that continuum can be associated with the body and brain and so on of a fly. which then will have very limited awareness and understanding of what's going on around it. And then from other instincts, could be associated with a human body or a chicken body. Or, in Buddhism we speak about other realms as well. Ghosts and spirits and hell realms and all of that. But in any case, there is no specific identity, fixed identity to that mental continuum. It's individual, but it's not necessarily male or female or human or animal or whatever type of aggregates it will have, so-called tainted aggregates coming from unawareness, and all the things that develop from unawareness will be variable from one lifetime to another. So this is what we are talking about. And you never know what's going to come next. That is the scary part of what type of basis is going to be, in a sense, generated. Of course, it has its own causes in terms of the parents and elements and the phase of evolution of the world, whether it could be a dinosaur or there are no more dinosaur, rebirths left, here, so you can't be born as a dinosaur now. But, many, many causes and conditions coming together for what type of rebirth we're going to have. Okay, now.
Can I add something?
Yes.
In the end, maybe you get a kind of a Buddha body as a basis of your experience.
In the end, would we get a Buddha body as a basis? It's not as though that is inevitable.
No.
It's not as though it's going to, it's going closer and closer to that, which you do have in some philosophical systems, Indian philosophical systems. But optimally, what we would aim for is to have a Buddha body and an omniscient mind of a Buddha. So, like that. That's the aim. If we want to benefit everybody. There has to be a reason why you want to attain that. Now, unawareness. So unawareness is unawareness of how we exist. We want to assert it that way because the 12 links and the whole mechanism of rebirth and gaining liberation from rebirth is a topic that is shared in common between the so-called Hinayana traditions and the Mahayana traditions, or the traditions based nowadays on the Pali texts, although Hinayana covers many more systems besides that, and what's based on the Sanskrit texts. But although Hinayana and Mahayana are not terribly nice terms and a bit derogatory, putting down the Hinayana, but that's why I sometimes call it the vast vehicle and modest vehicle rather than the great and the lesser one. But in any case, it is shared in common as a goal. Liberation is shared in common as a goal for both those that are aiming for their own individual liberation as an arhat and those who are aiming for enlightenment as a Buddha. And in the, we have many different tenet systems or systems of philosophy in the Buddhist sphere as studied by the Tibetans, coming from the Nalanda University tradition in India. And according to within Madhyamaka, the Prasangika view, and that distinction between Svatantrika and Prasangika was noted by the Tibetans. You didn't have that in India, but in any case, from the Prasangika point of view, we have one way of understanding, and then everybody else, all the other views, state that there's only a certain type of understanding that we need in order to gain liberation, and a different type of understanding in order to gain enlightenment. By understanding, we're talking about a voidness, an absence of a referent to some impossible way of existing that we project onto things. When we speak about voidness, it's the term that I prefer over emptiness. It's talking about an absence, something that is not there and never existed. So it's not just not in the room, but in the other room. But there is never no such thing. Never was such a thing, and never will be such a thing. And that is an actual findable referent that is corresponding to what we project and imagine. We are projecting and imagining something which is totally impossible, and it can't refer to anything real. So that's what's totally absent. As in imagining that you exist as a monster. Well, there are no such things as monsters, so how could you exist as a monster? Something like that. An invader from the fifth dimension is the example that I like to use from Star Trek. Anyway, no such thing. This is ridiculous. What is impossible with regard to individuals, persons, and what's impossible with regard to everything, the non-prasangas will say that those are different. That's why we are specifying what is impossible with regards to persons. Prasangika will say, well, actually, there's a more profound level of what's impossible, which is in common to persons and everything. So really, you have to get rid of that. But still, it's within the sphere of what's impossible regarding persons. So that's what we're talking about. Unawareness of how we and all beings, how all individuals exist. And there are two levels of that. In general, they will be defined differently, but by different schools. But the two general levels are doctrinally based and automatically arising. I should get back to why I choose voidness, just to complete what I was saying, as opposed to emptiness. Emptiness implies, I don't know if you have different words in your language, Danish, but in many languages they don't have two different words for emptiness and voidness, so it becomes a little bit irrelevant, this discussion. But empty implies that there is something like a glass and it's empty. There's nothing inside it. Well, that is okay for Svatantrika or Chittamatra tenet systems, where they assert that there is findable, conventional, from the point of view of conventional truth, something findable, but it is devoid or empty of something else. So there, emptiness works, but that's not the Prasangika view. When we say voidness, it's the same word, by the way, as the Sanskrit word, or the root is the same as the Sanskrit word for zero. So nothing, in the sense that there is no such thing. It's not that there is something and it's empty of something else, but that something is still there. It's completely void, a voidness, nothingness in that sense. But it's not an absence of everything. It's just an absence of a referent of what's impossible. That one has to understand. That you have, when there is nothing, it's the absence of something. So it has to be the absence, like there's an absence of an apple on my table. So you can see there's no apple on the table. What do you see? You see nothing on the table, but you understand nothing to be the absence of an apple. Or an absence of milk in the refrigerator, so you have to go out and buy milk. It's interesting how what you're actually seeing is nothing. Okay, so that's why I prefer the word voidness. Now, doctrinally based unawareness is based on some doctrine that we've been taught. You've been taught something, and not only taught it, but you believe it to be true. And on the basis of that, you have unawareness. As in, for example, the person, I am actually a soul that lives inside me and flies off to another body and can fly off to some transcendent realm and be totally free. That type of thing. Well, the dog wouldn't believe that. You have to be taught that and be capable of understanding it and believe in it in order to hold that type of view. So that's doctrinally based. And then there are automatically arising unawareness, which the dog will have as well. Everybody has that, just sort of automatically, because that's the way that things appear to us. That I exist isolated from, independent of everything else. And as I said, that is often can be traced to or linked to certain hardware problems. As in, you close your eyes and I'm still there, and there's a voice going on in my head, so there must be somebody inside that's talking. This type of thing. So it just feels like that, doesn't it? As opposed to it being a soul inside that can go to heaven that's talking. But somebody is talking inside there, so that's automatically arising. Okay, now, what happens is, with this link, is that we're unaware of how we exist, or we think we exist in some, opposite way, and we feel insecure. Let's speak more in terms of, we imagine that we exist in some impossible way. And since it's based on something impossible that doesn't exist, naturally we experience that as insecurity. And I'm sure we all are familiar with insecurity. Everybody feels insecure. So that's why. Because you're conceiving of yourself as some sort of independently existing thing that could be made secure. The secret is that there's nothing to be made secure, so what are you worried about? What are you feeling insecure about? Just forget it. It's not an issue. Security or insecurity. So you go much deeper underneath it. What's the basis for feeling insecure? So anyway, we feel insecure. And because of feeling insecure, then we get these disturbing emotions and disturbing attitudes. And remember, these are states of mind that when they arise, we lose peace of mind, and it causes us to also lose self-control. That leads then to the compulsiveness of karma, compulsive behavior. So, disturbing emotions are basically some sort of mechanism that we use, a mental framework and a strategy to try to make this impossible self secure. So one strategy would be to get things to us. If I can just get enough money, get enough likes on my Facebook page, and so on, I will feel secure. And of course, we never have enough, do we? And it's an impossible mechanism. It doesn't work. But we always want more, and what we have, so we always want what we don't have. What we have, we don't want to let go of, and what we have is not enough. We want more. That's greed. So, more and more visits to my website, if I use my own example. So, that's longing, desire, or attachment, or greed. It's based on exaggerating the good qualities of what it is that we want, and imagining that, or adding good qualities that aren't there, and imagining that somehow it has the power to make this fantasy of me real. Not real, secure. Now, mind you, we do exist. There is a conventional me. but we don't exist in this impossible way that we project and imagine. I exist, I'm eating, you're not eating, I'm eating. So there is a me, but it doesn't exist in an impossible way, and that impossible way is not corresponding to reality. Yeah.
In short, what is the impossible way that we think we and things exist?
What is the impossible way that we think that we and things exist? That hopefully we will deal with, in the latter part of this seminar, because there will be 3 levels of it that we need to deal with. So, just as a preview of coming attractions, the grossest way would be the type of soul, or Atman, that is taught in the non-Buddhist Indian philosophies. One that is static, that is unaffected by anything, and which is monolithic, has no parts. So either the size of the universe, Atman is Brahma, or just a tiny little spark, and can exist independently of a body and mind. As in, when it becomes liberated, it is, in some other type of realm without any body or mind. So that's the first level. Second level is that a self that can be self-sufficiently knowable. Self-sufficiently knowable would be that this automatically arises, that I can perceive somebody without perceiving also the basis upon which they're imputed. So, for instance, in terms of other people, I see, your name is Tio, so I see Tio. It's not that I see a body and labeled on that body as Tio. I imagine that I can just see Tio, or I know Tio, or I know myself, or I see myself in the mirror, or I am speaking to, someone on the telephone. Well, it's a vibration of who knows what inside this little black box that is simulating some vibration of air coming from somebody else, but oh no, I hear somebody, as if you could hear somebody independently of that. Or the classic example that I love to use is that I want you to love me for myself, for me, not for my body, not for my money, not for my, looks or anything, but just love me for me, as if, there was a me that could be loved separately from all these things. So that we all think of that in terms of that. And then the subtlest level is and this gets very, very subtle, that that there's actually a referent object when we I don't want to get too complicated here, but that there is a findable reference within the basis for imputation that by its own power can establish us. In other words, to put it in simple language, that there is something findable inside me, in a sense, inside my body or inside my mind, that by its own power makes me me, as an individual and not you, as if there's some findable barcode or genome or something like that makes me me.
But what about my mind stream?
That is findable within the mental continuum or within the body or within both. That there is a findable characteristic that by its own power makes me me. And that whatever characteristics are there correspond to something. However, please let us table this discussion until we get there. Now, disturbing emotions, get back to our topic. We have unawareness of how we exist, and there will be many different levels of impossible ways that we imagine in which we exist. To just tie in with what I just said. And based on each of them, of these levels of what's impossible, we will have disturbing emotions, because this projection of a me existing in a certain way still is going to feel insecure about it. And so still, we're going to have different levels of disturbing emotions, as in, we discussed longing, desire. So I got to get things to me in order to make that self secure, that imagined me secure. Anger and hostility, repulsion, I have to get things away that'll somehow make me secure. Or naivety, which is I will deny that there's any effect of what I do on others, and so I can do whatever I want, and that'll make me feel secure. I can say whatever I want and do whatever I want, and it's not going to have any effect. That type of naivety, or naivety about how we exist, how others exist. So, I can treat you terribly because you don't have feelings, as if you don't really, the other person doesn't really exist with feelings. So that's a total denial. It's naivety. And also, in a sense, we think that somehow that'll make us more secure. If I just deny the existence of other people. So, we have these disturbing emotions, and then we have disturbing attitudes. And disturbing attitudes, as I said, are this type of mental factor, which is, if you look at the definition is that it is, in a sense, seeking to latch on to something with a incorrect consideration and an attitude that adds something to it. What we have. So that would be the one that is the most classic one, is with the seeking to latch on. I call that like throwing out a net of me and mine onto everything. So it has this interpolation, it's called, the projection of me and mine, but that attitude is going around and trying to, me, mine, my partner, my desk, me, my body, don't, my space, don't come too close. That type of thing. So, you can see that how we imagine that that's going to make us secure. If we have my territory around me, and don't invade my territory. So we have disturbing emotions and disturbing attitudes. That's the first link. Let's just make sure that we've understood that for a moment. Okay, then the second link is called, the actual name, affecting impulses. That's just the name. What it is talking about is karma, basically. And karma, we saw, is compulsiveness, compulsion that drives us to act in a certain way. And there are various explanations of it in the different Indian Buddhist tenet systems. Either it is a mental factor, like an urge, compulsive urge that drives us to act in a certain way, or also there's some aspects of it as described in another tenet system, which has more of a physical energy component to it, so an impulse that will lead us to act in a certain way. So let's just leave it simple without going into this more complex discussion of karma. We have compulsion, and it's called affecting because it affects what we do and what we will experience. Now, Because, remember, we have disturbing emotions and disturbing attitudes. The definition causes us to lose peace of mind and self-control. So because we lose self-control, then when we feel like acting in a certain way, or feel like saying something, you see, that's what ripens from the karmic tendencies, is you feel like doing it. I feel like, having something to eat. So it's like a wish, in a sense. So that when that occurs, then compulsiveness kicks in. See, that's where you can stop it. If you want to just leave our way of acting on the level of exercising self-control, which is, in the Lamrim presentation, that's the first level, initial level of motivation. That using discriminating awareness, I understand that I'm on a diet, and if every time I feel like eating a piece of cake or chocolate, I'm just going to put on more weight, and that's not what I want to do. Therefore, I feel like having a piece of chocolate, or somebody who has given up smoking, I feel like having a cigarette, you just don't do it. So what you are dealing with here is when you feel like acting in a destructive way or a neurotically constructive way, cleaning the house yet again, and you've just done it, then then we lose self-control and compulsion kicks in. And that compulsiveness, is the second link, then leads to our behavior, speaking, acting, thinking in a certain way, which is based on these disturbing emotions and disturbing attitudes and accompanied by them. And that then has aftermath. And the aftermath that is left from that is rather complex. So we don't want to go into a tremendous amount of detail about that. There are potentials, there are tendencies, there are habits. These are all different. And let's just speak very simply in terms of tendencies. So there is a tendency to yell at others when they don't do what we want. There is a tendency to always, be afraid of dirt and we always have to clean, or something like that. The tendencies that cause certain type of behavior to repeat. And from these tendencies and potentials, there will be many things that can follow, can ripen from them. That's a whole complex presentation of karma. There will be certain results that will ripen. It's called ripened results, which will be like aggregates. That's what we're going to be discussing. That will be the basis for experiencing, acting out these tendencies. The tendencies will lead to feeling like repeating the behavior, and then of course we have no self-control. We will compulsively do it again. We will encounter conditions in which others will act in a similar, we will experience others acting in a similar way. It's not causing them to act in that way, but we will experience being the object of others acting in this way because of their own tendencies and general circumstances and conditions which will be conducive for all of this to happen. So, and it doesn't cause those conditions, it just causes our experiencing them to be there, be in that type of environment. So we have this whole cluster of aftermath, these tendencies, if we want to use just one word for them. And all of that is in this second link. So compulsiveness and the type of behavior that comes from what the compulsion leads to, and the karmic aftermath, the tendencies and so on that come from that. And then the third link is what's called consciousness, and there's two phases. There's loaded consciousness, so now it is loaded with these tendencies and potentials and habits, and then the resultant level of that, which would be in a further rebirth, which they will be activated. Now, loaded, that has to be understood. The word that I'm translating as tendency is literally the word seed. And so it's described in a simplistic way as planting seeds in a field, and then something is going to grow from it. Well, very nice image that we can use for understanding on a beginning level. But it's not, these tendencies and potentials are not something that is physical. Now I'm speaking in the most general presentation of karma. There is a more complex one in which there is something which is physical, like a subtle vibration, but let's not get into that. The tendencies are something which are, and here we have a technical word, which can be translated as imputed or designated or labeled on the mental continuum. What does that mean? What is a tendency or a habit? So the tendency to smoke. We have a series of similar events. Smoking one cigarette, another cigarette, another cigarette, another cigarette. As a conceptual framework to put that together, you would say that there is a tendency or a habit of smoking. You can't find a tendency. It's not something which is, findable. The habit isn't findable. But there are all these instances of something which is similar. So on that basis, you can say, you can designate, you can impute, you can label, there's a habit or a tendency. So these are what we're talking about, that type of phenomenon. It's imputed. You follow that? Okay. So this is what we have here with the third link, loaded consciousness. All the aftermath is now imputed on the mental continuum. And when we talk about imputation, and we'll get into this much more in much more detail later on in this presentation, it's not that somebody has to actively impute it. Whether somebody is saying, you have a habit of smoking or not, or we say, I have a habit of smoking, is irrelevant. It can be imputed, but somebody doesn't have to actively impute it for it to exist. Do you follow that?
No, I was sleeping, sorry.
Well, not really.
Okay, you have a habit of falling asleep during lectures and mentally wandering. So there are many instances of that. And on that basis, you could impute that you have a tendency to fall asleep during lectures. Well, is that, do I have to say that in order for that to be a valid description of your experience? No, I don't have to say it. You don't have to say it. It is valid. It can be imputed. So it's imputable. It's like that.
When we talk about karmic tendencies,
We are speaking here specifically about karmic tendencies, but there are many other types of tendencies as well. So there are, and these will also go from lifetime to lifetime, but here specifically we're talking about karmic ones that will bring about further aggregates, that will bring about repetition of certain type of behavior and so on. But there will be tendencies of the various types of mental factors, a tendency to be angry, get angry, have anger,
Well, that's not
tendency to, those aren't karmic. There are tendencies, but the mechanism will be the same in terms of how they are reinforced, but and that they will cause about, well, they will cause a manifestation of anger. For example, you have a tendency to get angry. Like now we've just paid attention to the tape being changed on the movie camera. Or it could be a tendency not to pay very much attention. I mean, so all of these are variables in their strength. So tendencies of positive emotions, of negative emotions, of concentration, these type of things, all of those will have tendencies. And memories work with the same way. That I remember, a certain incident, and then, I experienced a certain incident, and then later I remember that, and then another time I remember it, and another time I remember it. So on the basis of that, you would say there's a memory. Each time that it manifests will be something slightly different that will represent that category of the memory. But you would say that you have a memory, just as each time that we get angry, it will be slightly different. And each time that we experience a compulsion to do something, it won't be exactly the same as the previous one. I'm not going to yell with exactly the same words every time that I yell at somebody. And the intensity won't be always the same. So there's many, many different types of tendency. That is why, when I was saying, each moment of experience has all these components, and all these components are coming from their own tendencies, and their own habits. And various conditions will cause, different ones of these to ripen, in a sense, to manifest in different intensities. So it's very, very complex.
So I don't quite understand how the karmic tendencies stand apart. Like in what medium they are carried. How I can isolate them and understand that this is the karmic tendencies. From my understanding, the karma was generated from the compulsive behavior, and a tendency to be angry is compulsive behavior generating karma, generating the
Disturbing emotion.
The disturbing emotion and the karmic imprint to become angry further and to have an experience similar to this state of mind.
As he's saying that there are, what he wants to be able to do is to isolate the various types of tendencies that we have from each other, if I understand correctly, on the mental continuum.
Specifically.
Well, now, specifically in terms of karma. Well, we're talking about karma because that is the topic here. The karmic tendencies don't exist separately with a big wall around them that separate them from anything else. There is, of course, something called a conceptual isolate, if we want to get into technical jargon, which is that nothing other than this literally. Nothing other than. In other words, you have a mental continuum. What is a mental continuum? It is a moment-to-moment experiencing. Now we have to get into the definition of mental activity. Mental activity is the arising of a mental hologram. It's usually called mere clarity and awareness. Clarity is a verb here, so it's not translated very nicely. And it doesn't mean clear and focus. What it means is that something is arising, like the dawning of the sun. And what is arising is a mental hologram. Mental hologram, there's all the photons and vibrations of air for sound and so on, and that is translated through the neural network and so on, and what we actually experience is some sort of mental hologram. So the mental activity is the arising of a mental hologram, and another way of describing that arising of a mental hologram is a knowing of something. It's some sort of cognitive engagement. We're talking about, it's not that a thought arises and then you think it, but it is simultaneous. The arising of a thought and the thinking of a thought is the same process, the same event. The arising of a visual hologram and the seeing of something, that's the same event. And it's merely that, which means that there is no separate me that is observing it, controlling it, or out of control, or something like that. So that's all that's happening. And the mental hologram is a representation of a form aggregate, sights, sounds, etc. And the mental engagement is with primary consciousness and all these mental factors. So it's a network of things, moment to moment to moment to moment, and it doesn't degenerate because there's nothing that is the exact opposite of that. So every moment that could oppose it or stop it, and it's not getting weaker and weaker and weaker. It's just moment to moment to moment. The structure of it is exactly remaining, what should we say, undegenerating, non-degenerating. Well, now you can impute on it various tendencies. Tendencies in terms, because of similar recurrence of similar events, of anger or of, compulsion. It's not just simply compulsion. We're talking about a very complex mechanism of compulsiveness that leads to behavior, that leads to many different types of aftermath that will ripen in many, many different types of results, and the cluster of that will be the circumstance within which more compulsion, impulses, urges will arise. So that is one thing that can be imputed on, what's happening. Then each of the various mental factors will have its tendencies, the memories will have its tendencies, etc. Conceptually, we could look at it and isolate one from another. That the tendency of anger is nothing other than that. So conceptually, we isolate it from everything else, or conceptually, we could isolate the tendencies of karma, of compulsiveness. But that's just a conceptual framework to isolate it. It's not as though they exist with walls around them, isolating them from anything else, because they're not forms of physical phenomenon, and they're not a way of being aware of anything. It's like an abstraction. And we are talking about, specifically here, the tendencies of karma, because this is discussion of the 12 links, and it's talking about rebirth and how rebirth works. So that's our topic.
Compulsiveness can also be in terms of anger.
Compulsiveness can also be in terms of anger? No.
No.
Anger arises. Compulsion is what draws us into acting. The anger is, you have to look at the definitions of mental factors. An urge is a mental factor that draws you into to a certain object or a certain type of behavior. Anger is accompanied by an exaggeration of the negative qualities of something, or adding negative qualities that aren't there, and wants to get rid of it
Okay, but
in an aggressive type of way. So those are
adding
quite different.
The qualities, the urge can be to adding the qualities.
Urge doesn't add the qualities. The adding the qualities is an interpolation, which is an incorrect consideration. That's another mental factor.
Okay.
So don't confuse your mental factors. You need to learn about them, learn their definitions, be able to recognize them in your behavior, and then you know which ones are the troublemakers and which are the ones that you want to strengthen. You know, otherwise everything is mixed together in a big stew, and you have no idea how to actually deal with it. So now we've had our first three links. Unawareness, about how a person exists, the affecting impulses, that's talking about the compulsion of karma, and then the consciousness that is loaded with the aftermath of acting out the karmic impulses. Okay, so let's take our break and then we'll continue with the next
There's
part of the links.
There's a question also.